Hello ladies and gentlemen, in this video I will be discussing the differences between CSGO and TF2, covering the development, maintenance, community and future of both games. It is worth noting that in this video I've taken into account the statistics and tried to get as varied a scope of the communities as possible for both games. I myself have 3,000 odd hours in TF2, but only about 550 hours in CSGO. So a lot of the information regarding the community of CSGO has actually come from trusted friends of mine that have a similar amount of CSGO hours as to what I have in TF2. So without further ado, let's go into development. TF2 was Valve's entry into the ever-growing first-person shooter genre. It took a total of 6 years of development, which originally started with a more realistic design, but ultimately Valve ditched it for a more cartoony style TF2 that we know today. TF2 originally started as just a mod for the popular game Quake in 1996, which you can play a Valve-made version of this mod and in the game Team Fortress Classics. So really, Valve just took a bunch of passionate modders to develop the game Team Fortress 2 and make their staple mark into the FPS genre, taking as much time as they wanted to polish off the source engine and get what they deemed as the best result at the time. And really, you know, they all started with the source engine. I don't quite know if they started right off the bat with the source engine or if they were in Valve's old engine that a lot of their games were built up around. But TF2 was designed around the source engine. CSGO has a fairly different process to development. Like TF2, Counter-Strike started as a mod for a game. In this case, a mod for Half-Life, already a Valve game though, back in 1999. Valve bought Counter-Strike and all of its assets in 2000 and released the first Valve-published version in a year. It is worth noting that they hired both of the guys that made the original Counter-Strike mod, and they made all of this up to a certain date. They started work on a version of Counter-Strike within the new source engine, but released a new version of the game that they already had in the old engine in 2004. Then in November the same year, they released Counter-Strike Source, which was a source engine version of the game that they'd already released in the year 2000, and that was Counter-Strike Source. A modded version was then released in 2004 called Counter-Strike Neo, which was a collaboration. A separate version of Counter-Strike that was aimed at the Asian market in 2007 was released called Counter-Strike Online, but the series was really polished off with Counter-Strike Global Offensive that was released in 2012. And it is a little bit different with Counter-Strike. They kept releasing different versions of the game and they've had collaboration since. And they just kind of kept releasing the game and then polishing it up, doing things, making the game again. And really, if you look at CSGO now compared to Counter-Strike, yes, they look visually very different, but they had a game back then and really they just polished it up, whereas TF2 went from a little mod to full-blown game. But both of them were built inside the Source 1 engine, even though CSGO is now more than anything being edged into the Source 2 engine that they've got up and going, apparently. And TF2 is looking to stay in the Source 1 engine. In the topic of maintenance, over the years, both games have had their maintenance updates, whether it's to fix a glitch, an exploit, or to solve a weapon imbalance. TF2 has had a notorious history of a couple of bugs and glitches being present in the game for some time, but the main focus has been weapon imbalances. Many TF2 YouTubers actually built their entire channel around trends in these little exploits, bugs and imbalances, whereas similar issues are resolved in CSGO rather quickly. Reasons for this kind of come down to two things: the competitive scene in either game and the development team size. TF2 doesn't have a competitive side that is ran by Valve, really. And it's not comparable to the CSGOs. Seeing as TF2's own competitive league that's ran by Valve at the moment of me writing this only has 23 people playing it in total, CSGO has a massive competitive scene. It's massively built around it, and it is worth millions of dollars. And even if Valve isn't directly providing all those millions of dollars for those competitive prize pools, it still, shines a lot of light on the game. And if someone was to, say, use an exploit in a game and take home millions of dollars in a prize pool, you would be understandably outraged at Valve for letting it roam around. The other elements that affect the maintenance of the games is team size. TF2 at any given time has an average of 1 to 4 people working on it, but it does vary the way that Valve work on the game. And in the last 5 years, it's been very up and down, mostly just fixing bugs and maintaining the game with the spaghetti code that is the Source 1 engine. CSGO, however, has a team size of usually about 7 to 10 people from what people have said when visiting Valve. And at this moment, it is estimated to be 7 to 10. That is a lot more people chipping away at a game that was written in the same engine that TF2 was written in. And, you know, if they've refined the process to be much quicker because there's so much more of them and so much more work has to be done in CSGO, if an exploit's found, it has to be fixed within a day or so. You know, they have to be really quick. You can understand why CSGO is much easier to work on compared to TF2. Now onto community. The TF2 community is the backbone of the game. TF2's community essentially determined the massive trading community that's within the game. The competitive side of TF2 and its events are all managed by the community. Even the massive amounts of charity work and events is all orchestrated by the community. Not forgetting events such as Potato.tf, Creators.tf, and the Insomnia game series that we do, which is actually a real meetup where people go and play TF2 together, all community ran. CSGO has a bigger community of people, but fewer community events from what I've heard. But they did engineer their own trading scene like TF2, but in a very different way to TF2. CSGO values everything at face value, whereas in TF2 everything is valued as in-game currency, which Valve never intended for us to do, but we did it. And we engineered that as a community. The place where CSGO shines is its organisation of competitive events. These are set up mostly by E-leagues associated, but still requires a community interest to keep it afloat and going. And it's a massive thing. The E-league and stuff like that is just huge. TF2 does have its drawbacks within the community, though. From groups designed to inject hackers and bots into games to mass trade scammers going around profiles looking for accounts that have valuable items to scam, it's far from perfect, but on the positive side, the community massively outweighs the negatives. You know, if you have to look at all the good that the TF2 community does compared to the bad people that are intending to exploit, ruin the game, put bots in, it outweighs itself. It's just about your introspective into the game. CSGO isn't perfect itself. It's a game where people have been known to take it very seriously, which is literally its main / one of its only downfalls. In a game of casual TF2, you can find someone that will wish to play the game and not fight. They just want to be a friendly, they want to watch and walk around without engaging in fights. These people are sometimes kicked, but in a lot of occasions, they can last the whole game. If you were to even think of doing this in CSGO, you would be kicked out without hesitation. You see it a lot with players that don't quite manage the 1v6 clutch and get kicked out even in casual. It is a very serious game, and it isn't a very friendly environment for newer players. It can be quite vicious, but when you start knowing what you need to do, when you start watching the competitive players do and you play the game as intended, you'll be perfectly fine. But it's not an environment for someone who doesn't want to win. It's a winner's place, not just for fun, unless fun is just winning for you. Future. Both games, despite being made by the same company with very similar roots and about the same amount of time in development, neither games are alike. CSGO follows a very competitive route, trying to pop its head into the Battle Royale genre with some success. TF2 is following a very simple autopilot mode, and the game, you know, it gets pretty quick patches when game ruining bugs and exploits are found, but other than that, the vast majority of the game, new content and explorable content and events and stuff like that, is all managed by the community. Both games have a sustainable future, but CSGO being a lot more dependent on Valve's input than TF2 is at this point. Conclusion. Both games are amazing. Both have been around for essentially the same amount of time. CSGO is a competitive FPS that every game wishes it was, and TF2 is a fun, class-based first-person shooter that many class-based games have tried and failed to copy. CSGO is more serious and gritty to get into. TF2 is easier going. Take your time sort of environment where you can just, take it easy. It's not that big of a deal. Both games are impressive in what they've achieved, and we can only hope that Valve continues to support them both over the next couple of years. That does it for this video. Thank you for taking the time to finish the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you could take 1 second to like the video, I would appreciate it. This week's weekly shout out goes to Groovy for subscribing. Thank you, my dude. Consider checking out my Twitch and Discord in the links in the description below, as well as my Twitter. Forgot that bit. I have been Jake Caliber. Adios.